Dawning great rising, Cleveland, Ohio, and the rest of planet Earth. Welcome to another edition of 360 Info Network right here on AM 1490 WERE. Our broadcast partner, Hamtonio, is out in the field today. As you may or may not know, the Parade is going to take place in just moments. So if you're headed down there, you're not too late. Looks like we may be able to watch the rain come a little bit later in the afternoon. So if you were intended to attend the parade, I encourage you to go ahead and go down there. You're going to have a festival at Voinovich Park, barring any inclement weather, and Carlos Jones is going to be the headliner for that event. So make your way down to downtown Cleveland, and you can listen to us on the radio, or you can also watch us on YouTube and Facebook, the 360 Info Network Facebook page and my YouTube channel. You can check us out live online. Just want to take a few moments to let you know about a couple of things that are going on. Today at 2 o'clock, I will be at Literary Cleveland to host a poetry event. We've got 4 amazing poets who will be performing during the hour, and we're also going to have an open mic session. So you'll find Literary Cleveland right there on Larchmere across the street from Loganberry Books. The Porch Fest is going to be in full effect today, again, barring inclement weather. And I also want to let you know about the Borderlight Festival. I'll be doing a one-person show on July 25th, 26th, and 27th. The show times are 7:30 on the 25th and the 26th, and at 5:30 on the 27th. I'll be posting information on how you can obtain your tickets for the show. It's going to be a tribute to Winston Willis, among other things. It's called Unmasked: Navigating a New World Order. I'm really excited to be able to bring this to you. And we're going to be talking about some of the things that we'll talk about on the show today. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest to you. He is Mr. Jeff Mixon. He is the president of Black Lives Matter Cuyahoga. It is not affiliated with the National Black Lives Matter organization, but it is something that he has taken upon himself to create, to bring attention to issues related to social justice. I'm really happy to have him on the program today. He also is involved in voter engagement and embracing the political process, but using it to our advantage. So we're going to talk about voting rights, a few different things that we'll get into today. So with all that, welcome to 360 Info Network, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Thank you for having me.
Okay, please call me Vince. I might have a couple years on you, but not that many.
I might have a couple on you.
Okay, well, all right. I'll take that. I'm kind of embracing this whole idea of just pushing back on numbering our days, because when you number your days, you create certain realities that are supposed to be connected to those ages. I'm the age that I am, but I don't really necessarily feel like the years that I've been on this planet. And if I could continue to do the things that edify and strengthen and so forth, then I won't have to wear age like some of us do. And we wear our how can I put it? You kind of diminish in terms of your physical abilities. You can diminish in terms of your mental abilities. And we'll talk about the debate that happened on Thursday night, in which it was so apparent that somebody's age has definitely caught up with them,
Yeah.
But anyway, that's another topic. But again, I'm really happy to have you on the show today. And I'll just be transparent with the audience and let them know that I was scrolling on Facebook and I ran across a podcast. My good friend Al Porter Jr. has a radio program, and there are others on that platform. And I tuned in and I heard this brother talking about certain political realities. And I thought, okay, this is somebody that doesn't fit the mold of everybody that's talking politics. Doing some of the research that I did, I ran across a story that indicated that you supported Rob Portman over Ted Strickland in a race in Ohio. And because you were affiliated with the Democrat Party, it was a very unpopular position. But from my perception, it seemed as though your concern was really more so policy than it was politics. So if you want, we can go back and talk about that and just talk about what your philosophy is with relation to politics and not necessarily being tied to any specific party.
Yeah, there was a point when I was doing a lot of organizing amongst men and women who had been in the criminal justice system. And at that point, I was, trying to tell them how important it is to vote, the power to vote, why you should vote Democrat versus Republican. And I was having just a difficult time putting forth a lot of effort, stressing myself out because these men and women, it was obvious, did not have the same view of the Democratic Party that my parents had. Um, and I began to understand why. During my parents' day, we really didn't have mass incarceration on the scale that we have mass incarceration now. And because of mass incarceration and the so-called war on drugs, a lot of Black families were broken and devastated. And those policies not only came from the National Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton was a part of it. Joe Biden wrote the bill, what I call it, the mass incarceration bill. Bill Clinton signed it. And then if you were to look in Cuyahoga County and ask yourself, do we have mass incarceration here? The answer is obviously yes. Then if you ask yourself, who controls Cuyahoga County, Democrats or Republicans? Well, the answer is that Democrats control Cuyahoga County. They control the endorsements, and they pretty much control who we put into office. So when you have a guy like Daniel Gall, whose behavior towards the Black community has been so egregious, criminal behavior used to put Black men and women behind bars. Was even a subject of a podcast, a serial podcast. You start to ask yourself, why does the Democratic Party continue to endorse these types of people? And it really gets to me, it gets to the heart of my message, which is that we're beyond the time where we can just look at parties and say, hey, it's in the best interest of the Black community to support one particular party. That reality changed a long time ago. One of the reasons that we're in the position that we're in right now here in Cuyahoga County is because of the policies that the Cuyahoga Democratic Party prioritized, and because of the type of leaders that they chose for us. We think we're choosing our leaders, but if there's 500,000 people in Cleveland or 350,000 or whatever it is, and I only have a chance to vote for two of them, then I'm not really choosing. We're not choosing our leaders. They're being chosen by the Cuyahoga Democratic Party, which wouldn't be a bad thing if the Cuyahoga Democratic Party had our best interests at heart. That was the message that I was talking about in 2015 that started the war between me and the Democratic Party. I told them, if you continue to take the Black vote for granted, after talking to all these young Black folks that had turned on the Democratic Party because of the prosecutors, the Democratic prosecutors, and the Democratic judges that dealt with them in ways that were just beyond unfair. I told them, you're going to end up losing the support of the Democratic Party. I'm sorry. I told them that the Democratic Party will end up losing the support of young Black voters. We were having this fight in 2015 and 2016. I ended up being kicked out the Democratic Party executive committee for just saying that they were taking the Black vote for granted. But now when we look at the race going on here between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, what I was trying to tell them was true. They're losing the support of the Black community because of their policies.
So you can see that the Democratic Party could be losing support from Black voters who traditionally have aligned themselves with the Democrats. But I also think that it's important to understand the history of Democrat and Republican parties when it comes to black folks, because there was a time when we were more Republican than we were Democrat. And it
Yes.
was because we had this perception that President Lincoln freed the slaves. So as a result, he had the interests of black people at heart, which is probably not true, because his solution was to send us back to Africa. That was a solution that didn't fly. But then you had the 60s, when Lyndon Johnson and President Kennedy and so forth were implementing measures to apparently address the needs of black people. And I'm talking about the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. And there was this paradigm shift, because historically Democrats had been against the interests of black people.
Yes.
Then you had that paradigm shift, and then we kind of switched parties, but then we were taken for granted by the Democrat Party. And I will say that leading up to the presidency of Barack Obama,
Hmm.
because I recall that the president said, and this is me paraphrasing and not using his exact words, but the gist of it was that he couldn't be a president for Black America, that he was a president for all Americans. And if our position in this country improved, it's because the conditions for everyone improved. He used the analogy of a rising tide raises all boats,
Hmm. I remember
you
that.
know. So that's what happened. So he couldn't be our black president. Now fast forward to 2024, and we have a brother running for president by the name of Dr. Cornel West.
Yeah.
Again, I went to your Facebook page and I noticed that you have a photograph of him as your cover page. So I want to give you an opportunity to talk about why you think that it's important, if it is, to support this presidential run of Cornel West.
It, it's important for a couple of reasons. Cornel West may not have the best shot of winning right now, but Cornel West is a voice that needs to be heard. Cornel West speaks the language of truth. He speaks the language of love. And right now we have two parties. We have one that is on the verge of becoming like a Nazi party, and one that's not much better. If you're willing to support genocide in Palestine with American tax dollars that we could easily use to support senior citizens here at home, then I don't understand. We can't say that the Republican Party is evil and the Democratic Party is not, because what's more evil than genocide, and what's more evil than taking our tax dollars and neglecting our needs, the needs of children, the needs of senior citizens. And we're talking about the Democratic Party, which in my heart, in the next election, it will become official. But in my heart right now, I am no longer a member of the Democratic Party. They do not stand for what I stand for. They do not believe what I believe. They're just like the Republican Party in the sense that their priority is always to serve the business community, the millionaire class and the billionaire class. They ignore issues like homelessness. They ignore issues like mental health problems. They ignore issues like lead poisoning. And in Cuyahoga County, we've gotten to the point where when the citizens do one of the most democratic things that they can do, which is to go out and collect 25,000 signatures to put an issue on the ballot, and it happened with lead poisoning, and it happened with minimum wage. It was the Democratic members of Cleveland City Council that denied us, that disenfranchised us, that did not allow us to put our issue on the ballot after we complied with all the rules that were necessary for the issues to go on the ballot. That is as undemocratic as you can be. And that's Cleveland City Council.
Yeah. Well, I want to bring up something that we talked about briefly, and that is the culture at the Justice Center with respect to common pleas judges and young people who deal with being tried as adults. there's a disproportionality in the number of young people from Cuyahoga County that are tried as adults in relation to other counties like Hamilton County and Franklin County, Montgomery County, um, other major metropolitan areas in Cleveland. And the judges are primarily Democrat,
Yes.
and they're sending our young people away when they could be rehabilitated.
Mhm.
I attended a hearing at the Olivet Institutional Baptist Church last year when Chris Ronayne was brought in as a county executive and made aware of this issue. I'm not sure that anything substantive has changed about that dynamic, but again, when we look at those who are representing us and we look at our interests, in many cases we can see that our interests are not being addressed fully as they could be. And then there's that whole idea being taken for granted. And I just wonder what we can do as voters to leverage our position in the voting block. Presidents don't get elected as Democrats without our participation. And I think that's one of the reasons that they go through such lengths to
Yes.
take away our ability. I mean, I just read recently that they're purging $150,000, I mean 150,000 voters from the voting rolls because of inactivity. So could you talk about the going back to the idea of juvenile justice, could you talk about the culture in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court and why that might be?
It's Martin Luther King said at some point silence becomes betrayal. And we know that these judges and these prosecutors know what's going on in a juvenile detention center because we wrote letters, we protested. We protested on Juneteenth of 2023. We protested in front of the Cuyahoga County Juvenile Detention Center over on 93rd and Quincy. And we were trying to bring attention to reports that were in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, reports from the United States Department of Justice, which talked about the number of children that were being sexually molested in Ohio juvenile detention centers. At one point, Ohio was ranked the number 2 state in the country for children in juvenile detention centers being raped by the staff there. Children being forced by the correction officers there to have sex with each other and to have sex with adults. That's the culture that we're talking about. A culture of depravity and a culture of an unwillingness to address issues that are harming Black children, especially, but other children.
So, with all these children going to prisons the way they are, disproportionately in this county, what do you think can be done to change that dynamic?
A number of things have to be done. We definitely have to start a rehabilitation programs that work because it really makes no sense to spend $45,000 per year sending a child to a prison if they're not going to be rehabilitated. What we're seeing is rather than coming out rehabilitated, you have children who weren't violent before they went in coming out more violent. So we're creating factories that turn out violent individuals. That makes no sense at all. One of my big issues is jobs and vocational skill training. We use this college thing kind of as a con game. We said that everyone had to go to college. In the Black community, when I was in high school, everyone was being pushed towards college. They took the vocational programs out of the Cleveland schools and they put them into the Caucasian schools and the rural schools. Because if you want to lift up a community economically, one of the easiest ways to do it is to teach children vocational training skills so that they can come out of school, even if they came out at 17 or 18, if they knew how to, if they were electricians, if they learned to do plumbing, if they learned to do auto mechanics, any host of computer related vocational training skills, they will be able to start making money without going to a 4 or 5 year college, going in debt, spend $100,000 going in debt, and then they come out making minimum wage jobs, as opposed to the $40 an hour jobs that they could get if they had vocational skill.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about that, because if you step back and look at the big picture, you'll see that I don't want to call it a game, but I think there's a certain level of intentionality in the way the system is designed. So
Yes.
if you just look at the model, some of us can go to Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Cornell, and some of us can go to community college.
Hmm.
Those who can go to Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, they're the ones who are afforded the greatest amount of opportunity. But then when you look at how the whole education model is designed, it's based on dollars and cents.
Yes.
So if you look at what America's greatest asset is, I'll give you one guess of what it is.
America's greatest asset,
Yeah.
our colleges and universities. That's just a guess.
Actually, you're really close, because it's tied to the colleges and universities, but it's the debt. It's student loan debt. That's America's greatest asset.
Wow. I
So,
never heard it. I never heard it put like that. That is
yeah,
that's interesting.
that's the reality of it. So America profits by driving up the cost of education and then loaning students money to get that education. And the real quandary is that you can borrow all that money, you can finish your program at that university, you can graduate, but you don't have a job to go to. So many graduate from college and then they end up serving food to people or
Yeah.
doing other things that are completely unrelated to their degree. And then to get back into the presidential politics, you can talk about, debt forgiveness, but the debt forgiveness that was proposed by the president, it was a drop in the bucket compared to the overall amount of debt that's owed. So, they play games with us in so many situations. You talked about how the Democrats basically are supporting genocide, through their positions, but the Republicans cooperated when it came
Yes.
time to send the munitions to Ukraine.
Yeah.
They
Two wings of the
participated.
same bird. You said it the other day. Two
Yeah, I
wings of the
mean,
same bird.
they participated when they endorsed freezing the Russian assets of something like $500 million. I mean, you don't just take $500 million away from somebody and expect them to not do anything. you know
Exactly.
so
Hmm.
so what you have right now is you have another number of countries who are aligning themselves: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and about 22 other countries that are saying we want to be a part of this too. And they're pushing back from using the US dollar as a world reserve trading currency, because what they see is that America has weaponized its currency in a way that's injurious to countries that don't necessarily align with their philosophy of how things could go. It's really the ultimate imperialism that we've been dealing with, because America goes wherever it goes and it says we're right, you're wrong, do things the way we say they should be done, or you have to face consequences. And others are not, they're not willing to go along with that anymore. So I think we're seeing a decline in the relevance of the United States, and
Yes.
also the political power of the United States, because not everyone is willing to accept that. So I know I'm dancing around a lot of different things, Jeff. Forgive me for
That's okay.
being so broad, but I'm just trying to pull things together in a way that makes sense to people, to give them an understanding of a certain level of futility in our political process, because we as voters don't have as much control as we think we do. For instance, we have an electoral college. If you go back to the last election in which 45 was running against Hillary Clinton, I think she had a greater proportion of the popular vote, but he still got elected.
Mhm.
So then you would have to ask the question, is the power really in the hands of the people, or is the power in the hands of the folks who pay for the campaigns and get their interests represented?
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we talk a lot in the circles that I run in about we need to turn out the vote. And to a certain degree, I'm a voter. I'm going to vote, and I'm pro voting. But what I'm not for is misguided voting. Here's an example of misguided voting. And I was guilty of it myself. I'll never forget a day back in I think it was it might have been 2012, but I'm going to vote, and I've been really busy, so I wasn't paying as much attention. So when I go to vote and someone gives me a piece of paper telling me who to vote for, we call it a sample ballot. I thank them because I thank you for telling me who to vote for because I wasn't paying attention. But if that's how we're voting, and we're not even asking ourselves who is paying for this piece of paper, who is paying for this sample ballot, do these people support our neighborhoods, then we're not doing our job. Because if we're letting someone who doesn't support our neighborhoods give us a piece of paper telling us to vote for, and we're okay with that, then the first thing that we have to do is look in the mirror and say, okay, well, how can I change? How can we change in order to bring about better government? Because we're not going to bring about better government by not doing our due diligence, studying the issues, and understanding how politics works.
Yeah. You bring up a really valid point, and it's I guess it's kind of a frustration for me just understanding how people approach voting. And as you said, you walk to the polling place, somebody's standing outside, they give you a piece of paper, and it's basically a straight Democratic ticket.
Yeah.
But you haven't taken the time to understand who you're voting for and what they stand for. And I'm gonna bring up an example that clearly illustrates how we can get lost in this whole process. In the last major election that we had, you had two candidates. You had Wanda Jones and you had Kevin Kelly. Kevin Kelly served as a city council president, so obviously he's well connected. He's directly aligned with the Democrat Party,
Mhm.
and he was running against Justin Bibb. And the impression that I got, and I could be wrong about this, is just pure conjecture on my part, but the folks who pay for elections
Mhm.
supported both candidates.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
if they get Mr. Bibb, if they get Mr. Kelly, it doesn't matter because they get what they want. And I'm not going to say that they paid for it, but you can assume whatever you like to assume about that scenario. Then you had Wanda Jones, who was a Republican running against someone who had no judicial experience.
Mhm.
And when you look at her story, she was working at the post office. She decided she wanted to become an attorney. She went to law school. She got her degree. She became a judge. She's tried cases. She has judicial experience. And she's running against a person who has no judicial experience, who's never been involved in a trial, to my knowledge. And now he's a judge.
Mhm.
And we as a community had an opportunity to look at these two people and say, well, who's more suited to be our judge? Someone who is one of us, who
Mhm.
understands our situation, who literally did what has been suggested by conservatives for so long, and that is pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's what she did.
Mhm.
And she was the perfect person to represent our interests in that court of law. But
Yes.
because we didn't take the time to educate ourselves, we
Yes.
voted for somebody just because of their political affiliation and not because of their past, because of their policy, because of their politics. We just voted because someone told us to vote.
Someone, and let me say this: Wanda Jones is my favorite judge in Cuyahoga County, even though she's a Republican, and she's a Republican because the Democrats pushed her out for the reason that you mentioned. Wanda Jones is here to serve us. She's not here to serve the powers that be. She's not here to serve the corporate folks. And Democrats, the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party has a history of fighting against people like that, pushing us out the party. If you're here to fight for the people, the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party does not need your help. They support candidates that serve the donor class, that serves the millionaires and the billionaires, that are going to keep sending our tax dollars to support lakefront projects, to support stadiums. They are not going to support candidates who are interested in justice over prison profits. And they're not going to support candidates that are going to support the people over businesses.
Yes. So I guess the follow question is, what can activists do? And I'm going to put you in that category.
Mm-hmm.
What can you do to shift the paradigm so that people become more aware of the power that they have as voters, and basically become energized to instigate change? You know, there at some point there has to be resistance to status quo. You know,
Yeah.
it's like what you said earlier.
Mhm.
You know, you're the absence of action on your part is basic complicity,
Yes.
because you're not doing anything to create a change in the way things are. So, you know, the $1 million question is, how do we engage our population to become more aware, considering the fact that we're dealing with the impact of illiteracy on the process, because some folks don't vote because they can't read the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
Some folks, they don't inform themselves because they can't read the articles in the newspaper, and they're not really interested in that article anyway. They'd rather watch the game or the soap opera.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we do to engage people in the power that they have as voters and participants in the political process?
Um, I believe that we have to go back to the root of the problem, which is to take a good look in the mirror. And in this particular situation, all races need to do it. But let's just stick with the Black culture. We need to be honest about what it is that our culture is about. Are we a culture who puts our Creator at the center of our lives, and then therefore we work together, we love each other, we work on each other's behalf, and we understand that community, um, that a rising tide does lift all boats. If we don't improve our community, we're not going to improve as individuals. So we sort of have to start there, because once we deal with that problem, then we can deal with some of the games that they play to divide us. Um, as long as we're thinking self first, it's easy to divide us. When we put our community as our top priority and understands how important that is, then we can begin to work together and develop our own narratives and not be manipulated so much by clever politicians, and and especially the ones that can manipulate us only because they look like us. They have this color skin, so we're listening to them. But we have to understand that, look, if I don't care what color skin this person has, if God's not at the center of their lives, they're not fit to lead us. That's my personal opinion.
So you're thinking that it's really more about creating unity through culture. And so you talk about being divided. Well, we're divided as Democrats and Republicans, because some of us are
Yes.
staunch Republicans, some of us are staunch Democrats, and
Mm-hmm.
some of us are somewhere in the middle because we don't have an allegiance to either party. But it sounds like what you're saying is that in order to get the maximum leverage from our vote, we need to be one party.
Uh, Now that's a good strategy as long as we're in that one party, as long as we're not being led around by our noses. Freedom by definition is people realizing that we are our own leaders, right? That's Diane Nash. That is the slogan of the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party. Freedom by definition is people realizing that we're our own leaders. So if we approach it that way, what rather than allowing ourselves to become the puppets of either party, then we'll be okay. It really doesn't matter we which party we support, as long as we're leading that party and that party's not leading us.
Yes. Well, there's the reality of what happens when you get a lot of people together in a room who all think that they know something.
Hmm.
That thing called ego creeps into the
Yes.
picture. and
Yes.
and that's the thing that really prevents agreement from happening, because people cannot agree to I guess rally around the things that they agree about, and then push to the sides the things that they don't agree about. Those things that are on the periphery are the things that really prevent that unity from happening. Going back to the event that I saw you at a few weeks ago when Dr. West was actually here in Cleveland, he mentioned something really interesting, and I can't quote him exactly, but he gave the impression that a majority of the voters who are disengaged from the process, and I think it was something like 62%, something like that, uh, are really in a position to swing the tide of this election, considering the fact that we have a convicted felon who is running, and we have someone who has apparently experienced some type of mental decline. I mean, I didn't watch the whole debate, Jeff. I watched a couple of clips, and the short clips that I saw told me that something is going on up in this man's brain that's not completely normal, and this is what really surprises me, because I don't watch the news, Jeff. I've made
Hmm.
a deliberate idea in my mind that news is just not something that I need to take in and day out, and I'm saying this as a former news reporter, because I
Hmm.
used to do radio news and a little bit of television news. But um months ago I saw clips of the president, and I could tell that there was an issue. So what happened Thursday night is nothing new in terms of what people are able to perceive about his behavior. So here we are in this place once again, and it seems like it happens every 4 years, where as a people we have to choose between the lesser of two evils.
Hmm.
And my position is that it's not a lesser, it's not a more than or less than, because the level of evil, from my perspective, this is just my opinion, and people can beat up on me if they want to, but it seems that there is an equality in terms of the evil. And the question in my mind is, when do we get a better choice than choosing between two things that don't serve us?
And it really does speak to our mindsets that we chose these two candidates. There is a primary. There are other people that we could have voted for. We chose these two people, and I think that's a good place to start. When we want to kind of just sit down and rewind things and ask ourselves, how did this happen? Um, and again, we're not leading, we're following. We're being manipulated. The tail is wagging the dog. Um, Most of the black leaders will not, or most of the so-called black leaders will not speak out against the conventional politicians. They will not speak out against the powers that be. And if we continue to listen to them only because they have a D next to their name or because they share our same skin color, we will continue to be misguided. We put Donald Trump and Joe Biden in this position. and it makes no sense at all. Other countries around the world, they have to be laughing at us. Joe Biden looks like he's 6 months away from Alzheimer's disease, and Donald Trump could be going to prison. And this is the best that the United States, the shining city on the hill, has to offer.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're embarrassed, but I'm embarrassed.
Well, you mentioned that we chose them, but did we really choose them? It seems to me that they were chosen for us. When I went to the poll back in March to vote in the primary, the only choice that I had was Joe Biden.
Mhm.
So it's not that the people spoke and the party spoke and they said this is our best choice. And my position is that they knew what they had back then and they know what they have right now. And there are a lot of theories going on out there that he's not going to be the person that they're going to run. I've heard that there is some scuttle that they may run Gavin Newsom. Yesterday I saw something that indicated that they've got some kind of special loophole that they can use to put Barack Obama back in office. So I don't know that it's necessarily a foregone conclusion that those will be the two that actually even run in this election. But then again, when you come back to that, is it the people having a choice, or is it others are making the choice for us? I mean, if you just look at the process, because I'm registered as a Democrat, even though I don't identify as a Democrat, I'm registered as a Democrat, so the Democrat Party decides who I get to choose. Now, and this is funny, Jeff.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm just looking at the primary process anyway.
Mhm.
You got these early states, right?
Mhm.
And the people in those states, they get to choose amongst a number of candidates. But by
Yes.
the time it gets to us, we,
Yes.
we
Yeah.
don't have a choice. We just get what they give us.
Yeah. The game is definitely rigged, and I don't know how many people in this audience will be familiar with the name Marion Williamson. A woman running for president on a Democratic ticket that people chose Joe Biden over her, even though Joe Biden has Alzheimer's disease. In my opinion, he's in the early stages of it. But it speaks to the political process in this sense. If we had publicly funded elections, the the playing field would have been leveled. We would have heard as much about Marion Williamson as we heard about Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But because we don't have publicly funded elections, once again, you give the donor class the power to focus the attention on the candidates that they want us to support. And people like Marion Williamson, poor Marion Williamson, people don't even know she ran for president, and she would be a much better president than Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And so that's one of the problems that we definitely have to fix. Either we have to level the playing field when it comes to money, which is going to be pretty difficult to do. The other thing is we could take more time to educate ourselves and understand that, hey, I voted for Marion Williamson in the primary. Other people could have voted for her, but other people aren't paying enough attention to make solid decisions. So we have to get the money out of the politics, but we also have to get all this brainwashing out of our heads. We are, even when we're given a choice, it's like we're not given a choice because we've been conditioned to think in a certain way. And I wish I had a quote that I just read on Facebook last week. It says, if you can control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. They have brainwashed us with all this democratic stuff, with all this race stuff, with all this gender stuff. Now they're controlling our actions. They're dividing us. They're conquering us. And I'm not sure when we're going to hit rock bottom, but hopefully it's before the Nazis start marching down the street, because
Yeah,
they're already starting in California.
right. Well, you talk about campaign finance reform and you look at the realities of our economic system. And the political system. I referenced the distinguished gentleman earlier, and I watched half of that film, and it's a comedy,
Yeah.
but they're telling you exactly what's going on Capitol Hill. So elections many times are determined by the party, and I'm not saying political party, but I'm saying the party who has the most money to contribute to advancing their agenda. So if you have 1% that's controlling all this wealth, then is it really feasible for grassroots people to be able to raise enough capital to have the influence to change the outcomes?
I would say yes or no. Barack Obama kind of, um, and Bernie Sanders has done it also. Shown that with the new technology and the internet, you can raise a lot of money from small donors. But one component that's going to have to be a part of this is going to have to be the re-education of the voters. I think both of those things are going to have to happen. People with it, especially if we're not going to change the rules. The rules seem to be changing to favor corporations. So it looks like what we're going to have to do is to, um, use the capacity to raise money from small donors, but also if we could just get over this Democratic Republican thing, I think it will open up our minds enough where we can start really thinking in a way where we're thinking for ourselves rather than having other people think for us when we're in that voting booth.
There are some who might say that we basically need to take our own destinies into our own hands. For instance, we talked a little bit earlier about the education system. You brought up the quote about controlling a person's thinking and basically controlling their behavior. Um, the school system is designed to bring free labor
Yes.
into a place of profit. And let's be real about it.
Yes.
There's a public school to prison pipeline, and the evidence of that is the culture at Cuyahoga County that sends young people to jail when they don't necessarily need to go to an adult prison.
Right.
So we have to take responsibility for educating our children and educating ourselves. But at the same time, many of us, because of the environmental conditions that we're dealing with, because of the political conditions that we're dealing with, we exist in a survival mentality.
Hmm.
And the survival mentality basically keeps us away from the higher thinking that we could do
Yes.
if we weren't stuck in fight or flight.
Yes.
So it's an uphill battle, but at the same time, when we look at who we are as a people, we're the strongest of the strong.
Yes.
We're the
Yes.
ones who survived a transatlantic experience that resulted in so many of us being in this country, in addition to those of us who were already here. So, when you look at the extent of institutional racism and dysfunction that exists in all of these areas of our lives, at some point we have to take self-responsibility. I mean, we're living in a perilous world, where even the food that we eat is compromised to a point that it endangers us. I went to your blog spot and I
Hmm.
read a piece that you wrote about how paint, lead and paint can contribute to violence,
Yes. Gun violence. Yes.
gun violence. And so, it seems as though at every turn we have these things that put us in a position to be reactive to
Yes.
conditions, to keep us trapped in this fight or flight
Yeah.
mentality. And I think that's also one of the impediments to our unity,
Yes.
because we're so dysfunctional and so upset with each other about trivial things that we can't unite towards the common cause of our liberation.
Yeah. I would say that leadership matters, I hear a lot of times Blaine Griffin's guilty of it. Justin Bibb is guilty of it. Um, Drummond, the police chief, was guilty of it. Always point their fingers at the family. And, politically, I understand why you do that, because that is a message that the Black community is willing to receive. It all starts with the family. And I think that families can overcome a lot, even if we turn, especially if we turn our lives over to God. I really believe that that's the key to fixing our culture. But leadership matters in this sense. We need the leaders to help protect us from lead poisoning. Once a kid, has lead poisoning, they can't really control their emotions, so they're more likely to shoot each other. Oh, we need our leaders. We need to elect leaders that's going to do that. Um, I was going to give another example about leadership, lead poisoning and crack cocaine. Okay, so when crack cocaine came to Cleveland under the Vornovich administration, we had a Black president of city council. We had other Black leaders in Congress. No one really stood up and fought on behalf of the Black community and said, wait a minute, Mayor Vornovich, you're wrong about this. We're not going to let you sell crack cocaine, bring crack cocaine to Cleveland for the purpose of raising money for a sting down in Florida. If the only way that you can raise money for a sting in Florida is to get half of the Black community in Cleveland hooked on crack cocaine, then you're just not going to be able to run that sting. That's what we need our family. That's what we need our leaders to do, because at that point, the family that we're holding responsible for raising their kids, they're strung out on crack cocaine now. So the leaders have to do their job, and the families have to do their job. But if the leaders fail us first and they destroy and break the families, then sitting there pointing the fingers at the family is kind of unfair. And some of these folks who were hooked on crack cocaine, it's not like they decided to go out and smoke crack cocaine. Some of them were smoking weed that was secretly laced with crack cocaine. But the point is, the way that crack cocaine came into our community, it came into our community directed by City Hall, and then not one Black leader in the city of Cleveland, or not enough of them, stood up and said, hey, we're not about to let you, get all these Black families and all these Black children addicted to crack cocaine, because we are still trying to recover from that. And then that led right into mass incarceration. And then, you're looking at redlining, you're looking at predatory lending. It looks like the Black community is under attack by our leaders, rather than, the leaders trying to help us. They neglect us, our leaders neglect us, they abuse us, and then they blame us.
Yes. We have just a few moments before we conclude the terrestrial radio broadcast. I would be remiss if I didn't invoke this idea when you talk about leadership. And please understand, I'm not being critical of our city council. I'm not being critical of our political leadership. I'm just pointing out some ironies. We talk about lead paint, and we have a building going up near Public Square, which is headquarters to one of the biggest paint companies in the world. And I'm speaking of Sherwin-Williams.
Sure.
What some folks don't know is that Sherwin-Williams, as far as I'm aware, also encompasses the Dutch Boy brand. And the Dutch Boy brand of paint still uses lead in its paint. So we have empowered a company to continue to facilitate poison in our environment, because people go to stores in Cleveland and they buy Dutch Boy paint and they use it in their homes without maybe knowing the implications of what they're doing. And our political leadership did not protect us from the possibility of that happening. Just an irony to let folks sink their teeth into. Jeff, I want to talk to you about Black Lives Matter, and we don't have to necessarily go long, but I think I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't give you an opportunity to talk about the organization and what you're doing right now And also, if people want to get involved in collaborating with you to advancing whatever your values and your mission is. So we'll take a few moments to do that. I will remind the listeners that you're listening to AM 1490 WERE. This is 360 Info Network. I'm Vince Robinson. My guest is Jeff Mixon, and he is the president of Black Lives Matter Cuyahoga. Also, want to continue to share with you the performance that will take place during the Border Light Festival. I'm going to be doing a one-person show. It's going to be at the Hermit Club, which is behind the Playhouse Square landscape. And the programs will start at 7:30 on the 25th and the 26th, and at 5:30 on the 27th. You can go to the website, which is borderlightcle.org. Find the box office, and when you find the box office, you can just put my show in the search window. It's called Unmasked: Navigating a New World Order, and you'll be able to purchase your tickets for that. It is a worthy cause, so I just want to make everyone aware of the fact that I will be paying tribute to Winston Willis. I've created a film about him and his life, and you'll be able to view that film. I'll also be playing some music. I'm going to do some performance poetry, and it's going to be a show that I think that you will enjoy and you won't want to miss. So with that, I would like to thank everyone who has tuned in to the radio broadcast. We're going to spend a few more moments with Jeff Mixon, who is the president of Black Lives Matter Cuyahoga, and get the skinny from him on what BLM Cuyahoga is doing. And I'm sure that whatever they're doing, it is something that is being done with the intention of raising the bar and improving the quality of life for folks here in Cuyahoga County. So with that, as always, thank you, Tone Harley, for making this broadcast possible, keeping us on point. Know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, make it a great day. Peace. All right. We are exclusively on Facebook and YouTube right now. If you're just joining us, my guest is Jeff Mixon. He is the president of Black Lives Matter, Cuyahoga County. Just to be clear, he's not affiliated with the organization that some folks say George Soros is funding. There's a controversy about that. Who knows? Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But I just want to make it clear that he's not connected with that organization. He took it upon himself to create this organization to make a difference in the lives of people here in Cuyahoga County, to get them energized to be involved in the voting process, the political process. Jeff, I know you were probably involved in that initiative last year where they wanted the people to have a say on a certain percentage of
Yes.
Cleveland's budget. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that there is nothing more democratic than allowing the people to decide how their tax dollars are spent. Why wouldn't we get a say? That's democracy. Democracy is people rule. And I think the PB Cleveland, in a sense, they were, I talk about narratives a lot because we're all kind of, when we talk about controlling people's actions through controlling their thinking, we're talking about narratives. And I'm glad that PB Cleveland and Black Lives Matter and other organizations are pushing back against this narrative where, we just go along with whatever our elected leaders tell us, and give them our power essentially. Freedom by definition is people realizing that we are our own leaders. Those are our tax dollars. We have the power to demand how they're spent if we come together. And I would say that because of that, unity is probably the underlying theme of Black Lives Matter Cuyahoga County. The reason that we can't control our government is because we're too busy fighting with each other. We've been they're playing so many games to turn Black people against white people, against immigrants, Democrats against Republicans. So with unity being one of our underlying themes, we want to send out a strong message on unity. So we need unity for good government. Unity won't happen without good government. So how can we lead by example on the issue of unity? And one of the things that we're doing that I'm really excited about and that's going well is Black Lives Matter Cuyahoga County is the only Black Lives Matter organization that I know of that works with the police department. In particular, we've been working with the Third District Police Department, and we're making it clear that we're doing this because we believe in community policing, number one, but number two, we believe in fairness. We don't think that it's in the best interest of the Black community to stereotype police officers. Um, for every police officer you can name that engaged in police brutality, I can name a police officer who is a servant of the community and a visionary. And so our community policing initiative is a test to see whether a group of Black visionaries and a group of visionaries from the Cleveland Police Department, if we were to work together, um, if we could help fix the problem with community policing, which is, I think, necessary to make our neighborhoods safe, but also to show people if Black Lives Matter and the police can work together, then which two groups of people are incapable of working together? You know, we don't understand how much it would benefit our community, our kids, and our cultures if we did work together. But to say that we can't work together is a lie. You know, I encounter white people every day. Mr. Robinson, you'd probably be surprised to know that at Case Western Reserve University, I was the first Black person in my fraternity. There were 32 white people, 3 Chinese, and I was the first Black person. Never had a problem with any of my fraternity brothers that dealt with the issue of race. It's possible for us to come together, but since there are people who are fighting to divide us, there needs to be that resistance effort that you talked about that's fighting first and foremost to unite us, and to unite us in a way where we're fighting to take control of the party away from the money interests. Let me give you a quick quote. I know we're running out of time, but this is one of my favorite
We got
quotes.
time, Jeff. So you don't have to rush.
All right. Well, this is a quote from one of my articles. In Jesus's day, he chased the money changers, aka the business leaders, out of the temple for good reason. A temple is no place for money changers. Neither is the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party. Neither is the Cuyahoga County Republican Party. We need to get the money changers out of the temple. We need to get God's people back in the temple, because the money changers seek to divide us. God's people seek to bring us together. The money changers, the business community wants to divide us so that they can control us. The only way that we can take back control is by coming together, taking actions, and creating narratives that bring us together. So the extent to which our community policing initiative, in which you have Black Lives Matter Cuyahoga County and Black on Black Crime Incorporated, working with the Cleveland Police Department on behalf of senior citizens and children, if we can show people that it's possible for us to come together and bear fruit for our community, then why can't every group come together?
That's a really good question. And just wanted to point out, in terms of community policing, my broadcast partner, you may or may not know of him. He's Lynn Hampton.
I know Lynn Hampton. He's a good friend of my sister's.
Okay. Well, he's a police officer and he's worked in community policing. And,
Yes.
you know, at one time he was president of the Black Shield
Yes.
as he was doing this broadcast. And I can remember conversations that we had about the importance of community policing, the importance of us being the police officers.
Yes.
Again, part of the research that I did for the show, I ran across a video that you did with someone, I think in Tucson, and you were talking about community policing within that interview. Um, there's definite value there. There's also the consent decree that we're dealing with. There's also the importance of, as you just stated, organizations like Black on Black Crime and BLM Cuyahoga County working directly with the police, because one thing that you mentioned was that a majority of the police officers are not the ones that are causing the problems.
No.
And so we really need to create that connection with those who have the right values, who have the right idea about the whole idea of protect and serve. You know, when um Colvin, Derek Colvin or whatever his name was, had his knee on George Floyd's neck,
Mhm.
that wasn't a moment that involved protecting and serving.
No.
And it was someone who, and I'm not a psychologist, but there was a certain um I want to use the term psychopathy, if it is
Hmm.
such a term, but that he had to be a psychopath
Yes.
to not
Yes.
understand the difference between right and wrong and how inappropriate it was. I mean, how much fear did he have in his heart when he was kneeling on this brother's neck? How could you be afraid of someone who has submitted to the authority that's been imposed upon you by virtue of the badge and the gun? You know, so we can spend a lot of time focused on the dysfunctional people who serve in those capacities, or we can align ourselves with those who see things the way we see things and have a genuine interest in, helping people.
Yes. And we have to, again, I'm going to use the word narrative. um in order for people to really understand things, I always tell people I can show you better than I can tell you. If you, when we've had our first police game. And by the way, I want to thank Robert Tucker, commander of the 3rd District Police, Captain Timothy Moffel Judd of the 3rd District Police Department, and Commander Johnny Johnson of the 5th District Police Department. But even the organization that, one of the organizations that I'm a part of, when we talked about the putting together an event where the students of St. Martin de Porres will be playing basketball against the 3rd District Police Department, even members of some of my other organizations, they were so negative. They didn't think it would work out. Tamir Rice was going to turn over in his grave, which I thought, wow, that's let's not use Tamir Rice to fight against community policing. But the thing is, um, the events were awesome events. If you were to have been at the events, I mean, it was just a volleyball game. The police, they weren't going out of their way to be phony. It was just a bunch of people, 40, I think there are 40 black children there, and about 15 police officers. And I'm going to use Captain Moffo Judd's word. They weren't police officers and black kids. They were just human beings. And they really got into that volleyball game and they really had a good time. And those are the type of events that we're looking to showcase, because we we have to have examples of the police working with us, just like there's examples of Derek Chauvin. You know, we have to, there's still another line. We have to make sure that there's enough light to outshine the darkness. The media loves focusing on the darkness, and there is darkness, but the only way to beat darkness is with light. And that's what the grassroots community can bring to this whole effort to create better government.
Yeah. Well, I'd have to agree with you, Jeff. I mean, before they're anything else, they're human beings.
Yes.
And so, they wear black or dark colored uniforms, and there's a psychology that goes along with the way they appear to us. But at their core, they're human beings like everyone else, just like the celebrities that we worship. Same
Yes.
thing. They
Yes.
put the pants on one leg at a time. They go to the bathroom the way we do. They're human just like we are.
Yes.
I also wanted to mention a woman that I know by the name of Jan Thrope. She's been very instrumental in a program that involves reverse ride-alongs. So you have police cadets who are just getting trained in becoming police officers, and they create opportunities for them to engage with people in the community so
Yes.
that they can see each other as human beings and have real conversations and express real concerns. And I think those kinds of activities go a long way towards humanizing everyone so that we can all see that we're all in the same boat. I
Yes.
also want to talk about, because we talked about the people's budgeting and so forth and so on. And as you may or may not know, I'm an art advocate.
I know.
And I've spent a little bit of time just looking at the way Cleveland spends its money on its citizens.
Hmm.
And I uncovered something that was really not necessarily startling, but concerning to me. And that was that 54% of our municipal budget goes towards public safety.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
I've been attended ward meetings, and I know typically what happens is the councilman will come in, they'll have a district commander or someone high up in the hierarchy of police command, and the first half hour, 45 minutes of any ward meeting is people bringing up their concerns about public safety. So, for that reason, because it's such a priority in the minds of our citizens, our resources go in that direction.
Hmm.
But then the question becomes, well, what are the resources being used for? And are there other things that these resources could be used for that could make a meaningful impact on the lives of people in this community so that public safety would not be such a priority? The sadness to me is that we are so concerned about our issues with each other, our fear of each other, our frustrations with each other, that we expend so much energy on that
Yes.
and not the things that could change the underlying conditions that create the fear that we have with each other. I
Yes.
live in Glenville, Jeff,
Hmm.
and across the street from me is an apartment building. And because it's there where it is and the rent is what it is, those who can afford to live there probably can't afford to live other places. And I'm not casting any dispersions on my neighbors because not everybody is the same. But
Right.
when it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, and there's somebody on the street with a vehicle and music that it's so loud that it's shaking the glass in my house,
Yes.
there's an issue.
Hmm.
But at the same time, if I picked up the phone and I dialed 911, first of all, I probably wouldn't get an immediate response to my concern.
Right.
Secondly, if that person who's had the police called upon them asked who called the police and if they point at my house,
Right.
then I got a problem,
Right.
you know? And
Hmm.
so, in some ways, we're our own worst enemies, but I think it really comes back to an issue that you talked about at the beginning of our broadcast, and that was culture.
Yeah. Yeah. You hear it in our language. I hear people that are even part of the grassroots community. So-called leaders. In their language, you hear them say things like, "If you see a sucker, lick them." And I'm thinking, okay, well, we could, if that's how we're thinking, then if we agree with that type of thinking, then let's just not be oblivious to the fact that that type of thinking leads to acrimony, it leads to violence, it leads to division. So sometimes we really have to take a look at ourselves and a look at our culture. I mean, this divisive way of thinking is found a way into our language. One of the reasons that we marched on City Hall after Drummond made his remarks about black children, Justin Bibb and the prosecutor O'Malley, they were already teeing up on black children, and we had to let them know, look, this language is dangerous. When you try to paint these 4 kids on TV. I think at that point at the gas station, these were dangerous kids. When you start calling them animals, what people hear is that you're calling all Black children animals. And once we agree that Black children are animals, then how do you treat animals? We don't take the trauma-informed approach of asking ourselves, well, what's at the root of the behavior of our Black children? And it's a lot of things. We mentioned lead poisoning, poverty, mental illness. We have to address those issues. And if we don't, if we try to solve this problem by sending everyone to jail and using the prison as, beds for people that are mentally ill, $45,000 per year, we can't keep them in jail forever. And when they come out of jail, if they're not rehabilitated, then our neighborhoods are less safe. We have to spend more of our money on police, and it becomes a vicious cycle unless we address those root causes. What's at the core of the violence, and how do we solve the lead poisoning epidemic? How do we deal with mental illness? Why don't we have hospital beds for mentally ill people instead of prison cells?
Yeah. Well, I think what you've done is identified the real issue, and that is dealing with the underlying causes. So we know that lead paint is a problem. We also know that food and diet is a problem.
Yes.
We know that there are certain environmental factors that cause the dysfunction. So then we
The
have to
malt
attack.
liquor that they ship to our communities
Yeah,
helps
all of those
cause
things.
violence. Yeah.
I mean, the drugs don't show up by themselves. They don't
Right.
just manufacture themselves and make themselves available for distribution in the community. They're there to create an impact, So I think a lot of it just has to do with how we rewire ourselves,
Yes.
how we rewire our brains.
Mm-hmm.
I again, getting back to the issue of advocacy and the reason that I brought up the public safety budget this year, Cleveland got a gift of $3 million from the federal government. But we'll thank Joe Biden for it, even though I don't think that he was directly responsible for ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. But we got this $3 million gift, and we're in the process of pushing that money into the community as a means of creating solutions to our issues through art.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at what art did for Cuyahoga County in 2022, it was responsible for $500 million in economic impact.
Mm-hmm.
$500 million.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that sends a message to me that not only is art relevant, but art is the answer.
Yes.
When we take, just give me a moment,
No,
because
go
I
ahead.
got to get this out.
Mm-hmm.
When we take art out of the schools, we impair the ability of those students, because when they are engaged in arts, they become better students and they become better people.
Yes.
This is just one thing. We look at time in this lineal perspective, and we are watching that needle or that wand or that hand go around,
Mm-hmm.
minute by minute by minute, and every moment is precious. What matters most is what you do with those minutes. So
Yes.
if, for instance, and this is just a wild, crazy idea, but what if you centered students at the beginning of the day and they meditated for 5 or 10 minutes
Mm-hmm.
out of a 7-hour school day,
Yeah.
and they had 5 minutes of meditation? I interviewed Mark McLean this past week, and he's somebody who practices Qigong, and he talked about being able to be in a school and teach children Qigong and meditation and how the transformation was almost immediate. He could see a difference
Wow.
in those students that they just spent 10 minutes in meditation. Something as small as that could be so meaningful.
Hmm.
But do we implement those kinds of things? No. But you can look at studies that they've done where they changed the diet of a school. They put the students on a plant-based diet and they saw improvements. So
Yes.
what I'm saying is the way the system is designed in such a way to be injurious. Now there are exceptions. We hear
Hmm.
about students who got all these scholarships to all these Ivy League schools and all of that. There are some exceptions. But if you look at the typical classroom, too many students in one classroom, teaching students different one way when they need to be taught in different ways, because not everybody learns the same way. Looking at school in Japan, the first few years, they're not even taking tests. They're learning things about life.
Hmm.
What are we teaching our children? And then now we're looking at books being banned
Hmm.
because they don't want us to know history. They don't want us to know the truth. They don't want us to have access to information that can empower us. Again, just coming back to what can we do? In spite of being in fight or flight, in spite of being in homes that may not necessarily be two family homes, which may not be the rule, may be disproportionately put out there to make it seem like black men don't care about their children, black men are absent fathers, so forth and so on. All these popular narratives. I
Hmm.
like the way you use the term narrative because I think it's so important to tell the story the right way.
Yeah.
There's an old African adage, that the tale of the lion and the hunter will always favor the hunter until the lion learns to write.
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
loose, it's a
Yes.
loose interpretation of it, but that's basically what it
Yes.
comes down to. I think we really need to take a more active role in creating our reality.
Yes. I agree at 100%. Freedom by definition is people realizing that we're our own leaders. You were mentioning the arts. I'll have to interview you may know Sharon McDuffie. She's been around for a while. Used to work with City Hall when Mike White was mayor. She has a nonprofit called Creative Circle, and what she's doing with Creative Circle is using music therapy to address trauma. So again, another example of how music can be helpful, and another example of the grassroots community saying, okay, if if City Hall doesn't really care about making programs like this available to our children, then we'll have to make them available. And so, to a certain extent, Black Lives Matter, Cuyahoga County, we talked about unity, we talked about narrative, and one of the things we'll be talking about a lot is using a trauma-informed approach in dealing with trauma in our communities and doing it on our own, writing our own grants, because a lot of the people that we elect to service, they just don't seem to be interested in spending a lot of time and resources dealing with the issue of trauma, which is at the core of a lot of violence and dysfunction.
Yes. Well, just bringing up the budgetary piece, I think that there is room within the budget to appropriate more for arts
Yes.
and more for those kinds of programs that you're speaking of that have a direct impact on the quality of life for people. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and
Yes.
expecting a different result. And we can't continue to do things the way we're doing and expect any significant change to occur. We had this grand pronouncement, I don't know how many years ago. It seems like it may have been 4 or 5 years ago when our city council declared racism as a public health crisis, which
Yes.
was like, Captain Obvious. you
Yes.
know, I'm guilty of myself of being Captain Obvious sometimes. But yeah,
Right.
racism is a public health crisis. But then the question becomes, well, how do you address it? And so you can pass the resolution, but what's the plan? We don't see a
Exactly.
plan. And and and
Exactly.
and on top of that, Jeff, there have been yearly conferences where all the big wigs and muckety mucks get together and have the conversation every year.
Hmm.
But then what happens after you have the conversation? That's the question. What are you going to do about it? And this is what we have to really assign ourselves to: a strategy, a plan, a methodology, whatever it takes to move the needle. Now, you know, racism has existed for as long as we can remember, and it's not something that's going to be eradicated from the planet. The fact of the matter is, life experience creates biases and prejudices and so forth and so on. So you're not going to change a person because they went to one diversity, equity, and inclusion program at
Yes.
at the job. I mean, it's a nice gesture. I've been involved in diversity and inclusion work on a corporate level, and I see how it happens.
Hmm.
How do they measure success in the DE&I world? Through surveys. Are people completely honest in surveys? No. They know that something is collecting this information and somehow it might be tied to them. So do they always honestly answer those questions? No. And if that's the only measure of the impact of DE&I, then we've lost something.
Yeah.
So, from my perspective, a certain level of it is just an exercise in futility. But companies can make that check mark and say, well, we have a corporate diversity officer and
Hmm.
we have these programs and we're doing this and we're doing that. But equity is about sharing power.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And until you give up some of the power that you have to share it, it's just lip service from
Hmm.
my perspective. So we have a lot of conversations about equity going on in our community, but when you look at the way things go, and I'm going to go out on a limb, Jeff. I usually don't talk so much in these broadcasts because it's really so much about the guests, but I see that we're on the same page about
Yes.
things, and I
Hmm.
just really want to make these things known so that people can deal with them. Um, in our cigarette tax funded world, where we're bringing money in for art and culture in Cuyahoga County, we have some favorite organizations, we have smaller organizations, and then at the smallest end of this spectrum, we have individual artists. And most of the money goes to those larger organizations who have lots of money coming from other places that individual artists don't have and
Yes.
smaller nonprofits don't have. We have a cigarette tax that takes revenues from the backs of Black folk who still smoke cigarettes.
Mhm.
So the question in my mind is, what is the return on the investment? And where is the equity in this picture? So my
Hmm.
thing, and this is just me as an individual, it's not me, the board member, it's not me, the activist, none of those things. I'm just looking at what can we do to make things right with the amount of energy that we're putting into this place. Now, there's going to be a levy in November, and we're going to be asked to support passage of this levy, and I support the levy, and I
Hmm.
hope that everybody who can turns out and vote in support of the levy. But all I'm saying is, once this levy is passed, if indeed it is, then we need to have some really serious conversations about equity within this realm so that it can be more equitable for all parties involved. And I'll step off my soapbox.
No, I agree, and that's a message that we needed to hear. Again, we're investing. Our votes are turning into dollars, and those dollars aren't coming back to us. And I mean, we have to keep reminding folks, hey, my vote. The Democratic Party is benefiting from my vote. Organizations are benefiting from my vote. They're benefiting from my tax dollars. Okay, I'm not supporting you because I think you need, necessarily because you need help. I'm expecting that money to help the community that I live in. And again, we need to, just be very clear about it. How much of this money is going to benefit our neighborhoods? And I
Yeah.
mean, and we want transparency. We want to look at the budget because again, I don't understand. It's really hard to get a good look at the budget. And I remember one time, I think it was like in 2002, I demanded to look at the school budget, and I was fighting, and we were doing a lot of stuff. Finally, Fannie Lewis managed to get me a copy of the budget, and it was just coded in a way where it was meaningless. And again, this is my question: if the politicians work for us, in what company do the servants tell the bosses that they can't see the budget? And that's the situation that we have here. We really don't know how our money's being spent, because if we did, we would complain about it. So one of the easiest ways to empower us is to keep us in the dark. But again, when that money comes through, please, I want to make sure I'm right there with you and whoever else is sitting there demanding equity on
Yes.
behalf of our community.
It's something that we must do, because aside from that, we're just being taken for granted. And if our participation leads to perpetuation of the status quo, then we're putting our energy in the wrong place, you
Yes.
know. And the other thing too is that
I
power
should
can
write that one down. If our participant, I should have wrote it down. I love it though. But go ahead. I'm going to look at the show again so I can just write down that quote that you just that you gave.
well, I wanted to also say that power concedes nothing without demand.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
we have to speak up, and we have to make sure that our voices are heard and responded to,
Hmm.
because that's another thing that we do. We're quick to protest. The protest was in vogue back in the 60s, but now we have protests and the media don't even show up. So if
Hmm.
media doesn't show up, what's the point of the protest? A few people in the vicinity heard, but the masses, they don't get your voice.
Hmm.
I'm just reflecting on Dr. West coming to Cleveland. There was no media at that mosque,
No.
aside from myself and Rhonda Crowder, who at one point was with the Call and Post and is a journalist. But media wasn't there. 358 1943 55 67 22. No, they weren't. CNN wasn't there,
No.
to hear the things that he had to say of substance. Now, I'm just gonna, state the obvious. I asked him a question about policy. He hadn't a clue,
Hmm.
and I think people need to hear policy.
Hmm.
You're voting for somebody who's going to affect certain kinds of things, and you need to hear those things. I agree that we need to love each other. We need to unify each other, and then the ministry is the ministry. But we also have to have substantive conversations about the kinds of things that can be done to address the issues.
Yeah. Yeah. The nuts and bolts of politics. And sometimes, I struggle with that too. I study a lot of Greek philosophy. So, you're talking about culture, you're talking about justice, but in the political world, it gets down to the nuts and the bolts. It gets down to the policy. It gets down to the budget. And if you're running to represent us, you have to be able to deal with politics on the kind of philosophical level, but you also have to be able to deal with the nuts and bolts. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? How do we educate and mobilize our citizens and bring people to the polls to vote their best interest, not the best interest, not the best interest of a party that doesn't necessarily serve them.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this, and we'll move towards concluding the show. Um, I think it's important for us to communicate our concerns to those who are in positions. And I would like to just sit down with Congressman Brown, Chantel Brown, just give me a half hour,
Mm-hmm.
just give me a half hour. You know, there are things that are going on in our lives right now with respect to economics, which is why I asked the question of Dr. West, that people need to know about. And, it somehow always comes back to money. I mean, folks are getting ARPA money here, ARPA money there. There was a groundbreaking yesterday for the Hitchcock Center. They're going to do 77,000 square feet over there in Ward 9. Beautiful thing. Guess
Mm-hmm.
where the money came from? Some of
Where?
it was ARPA dollars.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, and we were supposed to talk about some of the things that the Biden administration has accomplished, and I do want to give you an opportunity to mention those before we conclude.
There were a few things, and I don't I'm not a supporter of Joe Biden. I
Right.
just in general, I can go back to 1994 and the crime bill, but that was in the past. You know, um, when I look at the future, I mean, when I look at the present, what's going on over in Palestine, there's a genocide going on that's being financed with American tax dollars. Um, and I just can't, I can't support a president that in any way, I mean, it's actually gave Israel $17 billion to fight this war against Palestinians who've been living in an open air prison, who have been the victims of multiple genocides. When we talk about October 7th of 2023, no one mentions that in 2022, a record number of Palestinian children were killed by Israeli soldiers. So if you're kind of wondering how October 7th happened, look at how the Israeli Defense Fund is treating the Palestinians. So we give them $17 billion. So I'm just looking at how we could have spent the $17 billion here in the United States. Okay, so just to make the math easier, instead of 17 billion, let's take $15 billion, right? With $15 billion, we can house 500,000 senior citizens. We can put them up, in a place to live where the monthly rent is $2,500 a month. You know, that's how we could use $15 billion to serve the people here. And we're giving away money every year. But just, if they did it this one time, they can give 500,000 senior citizens living dwellings that cost $2,500 per month. All right. That's just the $17 billion that they most recently gave Israel. Our last year we gave away $45 billion in foreign aid. That could have provided housing for 1.5 million senior citizens. Now, if you look at a city like, Cleveland or Detroit or Milwaukee, and just imagine how would that change the
You muted yourself, Jeff. Okay. Yeah, Jeff, I'm not able to hear you for some reason.
violence, but we would rather give the money to support a genocide. That makes no sense to me. That's why I still can't support Joe Biden.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, again, you had mentioned that there may have been a few things that were beneficial. I'm not aware of too much of it. I know there's been some conversation about things he's done for HBCUs. I think there's also some type of, and I heard this from the vice president. She was talking about some home mortgage assistance where you could get like $25,000 in assistance for a down payment on a home. And again, this is an election year, and you want to earn favor with voters, then you pass out money, but
Yeah.
a lot of folks, even if they got the $25,000, they wouldn't be able to afford the mortgage. So, it's kind of it's a symbolic gesture, but does it really have an impact? You talk about 17 billion and 45 billion dollars, and using that money to cover living costs, and I think that's great, to provide a place for folks to live. I also look at what that kind of money could be done to empower people to do things.
Hmm.
Like, you take this money, you create a program, and it impacts people in the community. You take
Yeah.
the money, you create art, and it impacts people in the community.
Hmm.
Those are the things that I think about in relation to our municipal budget. Right
Hmm.
now we don't have a department within the administration, but if we did have a department within the administration and we had access to funding that could create programs that could make a difference, then I'd rather see that money spent that way than to see that money spent on a police officer to lock us up and put us in jail and send us to prison.
I agree 100%. Um,
Yeah.
a stitch in time saves nine. If we invest in children in the Black Lives Matter Community Policing Initiative, there's five components: invest in children, invest in senior citizens, defend the police. There's our trauma center where we're on the ground helping to work with organizations that are dealing with the issue of trauma, including like music therapy. And then we have our new Rainbow Coalition, which the focus is on racial unity. But again, there are lots of folks like me and you. We are on the ground. We're working directly with the people. Our efforts can benefit from that money. The people that we serve could benefit from that money better than the way it's being used right now, where it's really just being given away to people that don't really care about you know the people in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, yeah. I'll make it clear. When you spend money on weapons, just think about this. One of those missiles has 500 ounces of silver in its warhead. So you blow that up, 500 ounces of silver. And right now, silver is somewhere around $28 an ounce.
Wow.
That's money that's just, it's going up in smoke.
Yeah.
So that somebody who manufactures missiles can make money.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. When we look back at the Iraq War and Halliburton being involved in it,
Hmm.
Halliburton, a defense contractor, Halliburton also being in a position to rebuild things that had blew up. And then we fast forward to 2024, and then we have the world's largest asset manager, BlackRock, involved in defense and
Hmm.
also involved in putting things back together. When you're pulling the strings, you can say, hey, government, pay for these weapons. And then after we go over there and blow everything up, then you can pay us to put things back together. And they get paid on both ends of the equation,
Yes.
right? And then they
Yes.
get us emotionally wrapped up in the morality of this war, and this is the
Hmm.
enemy, and this is, and it's all a smokescreen for a profit-based paradigm.
Yes. I agree 100%.
Yes.
I agree
So
100%. And we, again, we have to be smart enough to not go for all these different kind games that they're put on. They're using mass incarceration to make money to oppress us. They're using wars to make money and oppress us. We have to start understanding, and we need those type of leaders. Again, I think one of the ways that our communities are harmed is that the folks with the money use these political parties to make sure they're giving us the wrong type of leaders. We need the right type of leaders to stand up, to implement programs, to teach, to teach the community, to, help people think about things so that we're operating in a way that benefits us rather than operating in a way that perpetuates our own oppression. Because that's really what we're doing. When someone hands you a sample ballot that tells you who to vote for, and you don't even bother questioning who paid for the sample ballot, you are now participating in your own oppression. That's
There it is.
self-oppression. You're
There
voting
it
to
is.
oppress yourself.
There it is. I was mentioning that we would close, and I promise you that we will. But I also wanted to mention some of the realities of the political process, and you invoked Marianne Williamson, who has spoken to certain issues. Like, I remember a few election cycles ago, she brought up reparations,
Hmm.
and after she brought up reparations, then we started talking about it. But
Yes.
then, as soon as the election was over,
Hmm.
those conversations came to an end. They weren't relevant. And that part of the reason that they were relevant is because it's something that we are concerned about. But, the reality of that political issue is that John Conyers came up with a bill to study reparations, and it was on the table for years and years and years and years. And they never really had any serious intention about resolving that issue. Now here we are in 2024, and we've got an unlimited ability to create money through the Federal Reserve and so forth and so on, which is how we can fund ARPA projects and spend $3 million on art. But we can't have any substantive conversations about reparations for Black people in this country. I just find that kind of odd. But I wanted to bring up the candidacy of Robert Kennedy because, to an extent, I think that it could be perceived by some that this is one of the ways to dilute the vote
Hmm.
so that there's a certain outcome. I mean, the same could be said about the candidacy of Cornel West, truthfully. What's going to happen if the Black vote gets divided between Democrats and another party? It kind of ensures that the Republicans, despite the fact that they're running a convicted felon as their candidate, might have an
Hmm.
opportunity. But on the other hand, if you could galvanize all of those that are opposed to that candidacy and shift it to another party who represents, I don't want to go back to that lesser of evils, but somebody who is viable as a candidate,
Yes.
then perhaps we could see a different outcome. Do you think in any way, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you think in any way that it could be possible?
Um, I would say that it's possible, but unlikely. And I say that, again, when I was kind of fighting with the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, I think what they don't understand is the amount of hours I spent on the ground talking to these teenagers and men and women in their 20s and 30s who had dealt with the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party. We keep talking about voter registration. I think one of the things that's left out of this equation is some of these Black people who aren't going to the polls and who aren't registering to vote. You could put a whole bunch of effort into registering them to vote and get them to the poll, but you are making a mistake if you assume they're going to vote for Bush. I mean, the number of young Black people who would vote for Trump if they actually voted would amaze people. But you don't understand that unless you're on the ground. And I used to beat my head against the wall trying to explain to these folk, you gotta vote Democrat. We gotta keep Trump out. Until I realized, you know what, that day is over. You know, some of these folks, a lot of Black people, like between 18 and 45, they're just not going to vote Democrat. And it's not a matter of them being, they're angry with the Democratic Party, and I can understand why they're more angry with the Democratic Party than the Republican Party, because we support the Democratic Party. We never really expected much for the Republican Party. We figure, well, if we support the Democratic Party, they would support us. They didn't do that. They allow our community to be broken, and now you have these younger black voters that are going to be a problem for the Democrats for a long time, in my opinion.
Yes. Well, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens on November 5th. I'm sure everybody will be on pins and needles just as they were the last time around 4 years ago and the time before that 4 years ago. But what really matters most is what happens after the election is held. And I
Yes.
guess we'll just have to wait to see what happens there. Jeff, this has been a really interesting conversation. I didn't expect to talk to you for 2 hours today.
Wow. I didn't know it was 2 hours. Wow.
Yeah, it's pushing up on 1 o'clock, and we've had a lot of meaningful dialogue, and there have been folks who have been with us for this journey. So I just want to thank you for your candor. I want to wish you success in your endeavor to make voters better educated and perhaps provide alternative choices for those that we have right now, because it's apparent to me when you talk about leadership, we need to see some changes in leadership so that our interests can truly be represented. And I will continue to advocate for a stronger percentage of budgets dedicated to the arts so we can do things in this community that need to be done, support the kinds of activities that you are engaged in terms of connecting with the elders and connecting with young people, because both need engagement. They need to be connected to each other, and they need to be involved in each other's lives so that we can learn from each other. Elders can learn from young folk can learn from elders. That's part of our culture, respecting our elders. It's necessary in order for us to be successful as a race. As always, imparting, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, make today your absolute best day, everyone. Peace.
Thank you for inviting me. Have a good one.
All right.